I was humiliated by my own daughter. She planned a luxury vacation with her husband and friends and told me, her aging mother, that I was too embarrassing to join. Imagine giving your life away, only to be cast aside like clutter. I stayed silent, but what she didn't know was this. The 5-star resort she bragged about, the palace she flaunted on social media, was mine. I built it with sweat, sacrifice, and silence. And when she strutted in demanding privilege, I only had to whisper one command to security. In that moment, everything she took for granted collapsed. I was 29 when my husband died, and I never remarried. People said time would soften the loss, but instead, it carved me into someone harder, someone who could carry more than seemed possible. My name is Margaret Hayes, and for 32 years, I carried my daughter Vanessa on my shoulders. I worked nights as a cashier in a bank, counting money that was never mine, smiling politely at customers who never remembered my name. By day, I stitched quilts, wove baskets, and sold small crafts at the farmer's market. My hands were always busy, not because I loved the work, but because every dollar mattered. Every coin had a purpose, and its purpose was always Vanessa. She never knew what it meant when I came home smelling of bleach from the overnight cleaning shift, or why I pretended not to notice when my knuckles bled from weaving too tightly. I told her stories instead, stories about how someday she would walk into a life of comfort, free of these scars. And she believed me. That was enough to keep me going. The land came later. It was nothing then, just a forgotten strip of coast, rocks sharp underfoot and weeds taller than my shoulders. Everyone told me I was a fool for buying it, but I stood on that cliff with the wind tearing at my hair and thought, this will be hers. This will be our proof that I did not break for nothing. So I poured years into it, one paycheck at a time, a fence, then a small wooden lodge, then guest cottages, painted by my own hands. Every plank of wood carried my sweat. Every tile laid on the floor hid a story of sacrifice. When I was too tired to walk, I crawled. When arthritis stiffened my fingers, I wrapped them until they obeyed. My dream was not to be rich. My dream was to build something lasting enough that Vanessa would never know the hollow taste of survival. I still remember one night, rain pouring hard enough to drown the roof. The walls of the lodge trembled. My neighbors said it was cursed land, unfit for business. I stayed awake in the dark, holding a lantern and whispering to myself, "Hold on, Margaret. You've held everything else. Hold this too." By morning, the roof was still there, and so was I. The resort grew. Not quickly, not glamorously, but steadily. One cabin became 5, then 10. A restaurant by the shore, a patio lined with glass windows so guests could watch the sea. Tourists started coming, then returning, then bringing their families. The name Hayes Coast Retreat began to appear in travel magazines, but I never told Vanessa how much of me was buried in those bricks. She only saw the polished surface, never the calloused hands behind it. She was the reason I never gave up. Every time I thought of quitting, I imagined her as a grown woman, standing before this place and saying, "My mother built this for me." That hope was my anchor. There were quiet moments, too, the ones no guest ever saw. Evenings when the ocean breeze cooled the sweat on my neck, and I sat on the porch with a needle and thread. I sewed little patterns into handkerchiefs, roses, sunbursts, seashells. My favorite was a white cloth with a blue border, stitched with the words, "For Vanessa, from the hands that never let go." I imagined giving it to her one day, not as a gift of wealth, but as proof that every sacrifice was woven into her life. One evening, the sun fell low and painted the sky orange. The air smelled of salt and pine. I rocked in my chair, thread pulling steady through fabric, and thought, this is it. I've carried her this far. Soon she will see. I pressed the cloth to my lips before folding it, feeling the threads under my fingertips like a map of my own veins. I waited for the perfect moment to give it to her. Vanessa was visiting that weekend, her laughter filling the hallways of the lodge as if she already owned it. She never asked how it had come to be. She assumed, perhaps, that I had help or luck or something she could never bother herself with, but I smiled anyway because I believed one day she would ask. At dinner, I placed the folded handkerchief beside her plate. She glanced at it between sips of wine, fingers barely brushing the cloth. "What's this?" she asked, distracted. "It's something I made for you," I said softly. My voice wavered with pride and exhaustion. "A piece of me to carry with you." She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the stitches. For a breath, I thought I saw her lips tremble. I thought she would finally understand, but instead she laughed, a sharp little sound that cut deeper than any blade. "Mom, this is quaint," she said. "You really spent hours making this? No one my age uses handkerchiefs anymore. Maybe you could sell them in the gift shop, though." She tossed it back onto the table like a napkin. I sat still, the sound of the waves muffled by the roaring in my ears. The cloth lay there, threads glowing faintly in the candlelight, proof of decades of sacrifice, dismissed in a single careless moment. I smiled anyway because mothers learn to smile through pain. But inside, something shifted. I realized then that maybe she would never call me her pride. Maybe she would never see the roots beneath the life I gave her. And yet, I told myself, there are some truths that reveal themselves in time. Vanessa grew into everything I thought I wanted for her. Polished, confident, married to a man with money enough to wipe away every trace of struggle. She lived in the city now, in a condo high above streets that never slept. She wore dresses that whispered of designer labels, carried handbags worth more than my first car. When she visited, she arrived in sleek cars that belonged more to her husband than to her, but she wore them like armor. People looked at her and saw success. I looked at her and saw the girl I once held against my chest during storms, the girl I swore I would shield from the world. It was a Saturday afternoon when she called. Her voice was bright, hurried, wrapped in excitement. "We're planning a trip, Mom," she said. "A little getaway. Me, Daniel, some friends from his firm, just a week to relax." Something in me leapt. For years, I had imagined us on a vacation together, not as mother and child locked in old roles, but as two women sharing joy. My voice trembled as I asked, "Where are you going?" She listed the details casually without noticing how my hands tightened around the phone. A 5-star resort, ocean view suites, champagne waiting on ice. I could almost laugh at the irony, though the sound never reached my throat. She was describing the kind of life I had built for her, not realizing how close her words came to my own work. "Maybe I could come along," I said carefully. I imagined carrying her bags, helping with little things, even just watching her smile while the sea breeze touched her face. I thought perhaps this was the moment she would turn, look at me fully, and finally see. There was a pause, then a laugh. Not cruel at first, just careless. "Mom, really? A 5-star resort? You wouldn't be comfortable, you'd slow us down. Honestly, it would be embarrassing." The word landed heavy, sharp, cutting deeper than I thought possible. Embarrassing. I who had sold my sleep, my body, my youth, to make sure she never felt small. I who had built walls high enough to keep storms out. Embarrassing. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her of the nights I stayed awake counting pennies so she could have new shoes for the school recital. I didn't tell her that her comfort had been carved out of my discomfort for decades. Instead, I pressed the needle harder into the handkerchief I was finishing. It slipped, stabbing my fingertip. A bead of blood welled up dark against the white thread. I let it drip, staining the edge of the fabric. She kept talking, oblivious. "We'll post pictures, of course. You can see them online. Oh, and don't worry, I'll bring you a little souvenir." A souvenir. As if my place in her life had been reduced to trinkets carried back in a suitcase. I whispered something polite before hanging up. Then I sat in silence, staring at the cloth in my hands, the red smear across the stitches. The resort she had chosen. I knew it by name. The irony clawed at me. It was mine. Built by my blood, owned under my name, hidden in plain sight. Yet to her, it was just another glamorous backdrop for photos. She had no idea that the empire she was walking into was born of my bones. I could have laughed. Instead, I folded the handkerchief neatly, pressing the bloodstain flat as if it belonged there. Perhaps it did. Perhaps all beauty carried its hidden scars. That night, I sat at my desk with a folder of documents, papers I had gathered over years, deeds, trusts, signatures. My lawyer had insisted I prepare them. I had put it off, telling myself there was time. But now, Vanessa's laughter echoed in my head, her word embarrassing gnawing at me like rot. I lifted a pen. My hand trembled, but I signed. Line after line, my name sealing itself onto the future. I transferred the resort into a private trust, untouchable by anyone but me. If she saw me as nothing, if she saw my life's work as a stage for her vanity, then so be it. The world would know whose name was carved into the foundation. I leaned back when it was done. The papers lay flat on the desk, black ink drying slow. I did not feel triumph, not yet. Only a strange calm, like the quiet that comes after a storm tears through and leaves everything standing, but altered. The handkerchief lay nearby, the blood now dry, a dark mark woven into the stitches. I picked it up, pressed it to my lips once more, and whispered, "One day you'll understand." The phone buzzed again with a message from Vanessa, a photo of the group chat, laughter, plans, hashtags. The words blurred as I looked at them, but I didn't delete it. I wanted to remember this moment, the exact point where her words finally turned me into something sharper, something unbreakable. Outside, the sea roared against the rocks, the same sea that had witnessed my labor, my grief, my endurance. I let it fill the silence, as if it too knew the weight of being unseen. I folded the signed documents into an envelope and placed them carefully in the drawer. My name glowed through the thin paper under the lamplight. Tomorrow, no one would know. Not Vanessa, not her friends, not even Daniel. But I would know. And when the time came, when she walked into my resort with her head held high, she would meet the truth she had always refused to see. After I signed the papers, days stretched like low tide, exposing everything I had once tried to hide. Vanessa's posts arrived each morning like bright, careless birds, champagne flutes clinking, mirrored elevators, a new dress she called "a little thing I deserve." I double-tapped, nothing. I watched, and in the watching, I felt myself becoming a faint outline at the edge of her photographs, the kind of shadow you erase with a fingertip. It is a strange thing to be alive and yet absent from your child's life, to realize you have been edited out, not by accident, but by appetite. No one called. Daniel didn't. The friends didn't. And Vanessa, my vanishing point, sent only curated glimpses meant for strangers. The only knock came from Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor of 20 years, who walked the path between our porches with slow dignity and a tin of lemon cookies balanced in her hands. She is the kind of woman who announces her arrival not with sound, but with the soft smell of clean laundry and starch. "You look tired, Maggie," she said, setting the tin on my table like an offering. "Sit with me." We sat. She spoke of her arthritis, the roses that wouldn't bloom, the cat that insists on sleeping in the sink. I nodded, grateful for the ordinary. She did not ask about Vanessa. She knows me well enough to leave the tender parts uncovered. When she left, she patted my cheek and said, "You raised that girl on miracles. Don't forget you have some left." After she was gone, I opened the old ledger I keep in the bedroom dresser. It is a book with a spine so cracked it opens by memory to the heaviest pages. The entries are small, neat, and merciless. Piano lessons, $40, field trip, $12, dentist, $180, emergency, shoes for recital, $65 on sale. When Vanessa had pneumonia at 8, the column for hospital ran 3 pages, and beside the largest number I had written, just once, the word worth. I traced that word now, my fingertips stuttering over the faded ink, and felt again the burning certainty that kept me upright when the world pushed. Numbers are colder than pity and more faithful than praise. They tell you what love cost without pretending it was free. I turned another page. There was the summer camp check I could barely cover, the deposit on her first apartment, the tuition bill that split my year in half. Constellations of sacrifice, each point a place I bled and kept walking. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the math of invisibility, the way a lifetime can be totted up and still not count when the person you did it for refuses to see. I closed the ledger and made tea the way my mother taught me, kettle just shy of singing, cup warmed first with a little hot water, leaves steeped until the surface looks like polished wood. I carried it to the porch and watched the ocean work its slow, necessary violence against the rocks. There's a tempo to grief, a rise and hush, like waves spending themselves and returning for more. I let the wind lift the wisps of hair from my temples and listened to gulls stitch their ragged cries across the sky. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself nothing. No fixing, no proving, no rehearsing of speeches I would never give. I just sat, and that was a kind of prayer. Sometimes, when the truth is too large to hold, you look for handles. Mine were folded in a manila envelope in my desk, the documents I signed. I took them out and read them again, slowly, as if the words might change if I blinked. They didn't. The resort was now in a private irrevocable trust with me as trustee and lifetime beneficiary. It was not a renunciation, not an act of surrender, but the opposite. A binding of what I built to the person who built it, beyond fashion, beyond pressure, beyond the reach of anyone's entitlement. No court could pry it loose. No apology, should it ever arrive, could claim it retroactively. I felt a steadiness enter me, not triumph, not spite. Governance. I had set a boundary in ink. Evening came like a balm. I ate one of Mrs. Alvarez's cookies and thought about the first guest who ever signed our ledger, a newlywed who cried when she saw the sea through our windows. "You've made a place where love can rest," she told me. I had forgotten that line until now. I whispered it to the empty room, and it did not sound foolish. The phone buzzed against the table. I let it ring once, twice, before I gathered it. Another photo from Vanessa floated on the screen, a glimmering lobby, a caption about how the weekend was going to heal her soul. I almost laughed. Healing, to her, had become a backdrop with a flower wall and a logo. I typed nothing, deleted nothing, and set the phone face down. In the quiet that followed, I felt the ledges inside me soften. I carried my cup to the sink and watched the last tea leaves slide toward the drain, little galaxies collapsing obediently. I told myself I would sleep early, that tomorrow I would check the linens in cabin 4, that life could be ordinary again, at least for a few unbroken hours. I was halfway to the stairs when the phone began to ring, not with the bright chirp of a message, but the plain insistence of a call. I hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Hayes." The voice was brisk, respectful. "It's Andrew from the front desk. I'm confirming VIP arrivals for Friday. We've just added a party under the name Vanessa Carter." I gripped the rail. "Repeat that," I said. "Vanessa Carter," he said. "Added to the VIP list for Hayes Coast Retreat." For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not bitterness, not despair, but clarity. I woke before dawn, stood by the tall windows of my room, and whispered to myself, "I don't need Vanessa to see me. This entire resort is proof enough." The thought curled into a smile, faint but real. It was not the grin of triumph, but of recognition. I had spent years waiting for her acknowledgement, aching for her gratitude. Now, as the sun climbed out of the sea, I realized that the stones beneath my feet, the wood beams above my head, every line of this retreat, all of it, spoke my name louder than she ever had. That morning, I walked slowly through the halls. My fingertips grazed the cool plaster, the polished railings, the old wooden beams I once sanded myself. Each touch summoned a memory. The foundation poured in the rain, the smell of sawdust in summer, the sting in my shoulders from carrying too much. I paused at a brick by the courtyard arch. I remembered setting it in place with trembling hands, whispering a prayer that the walls would hold as long as my love for her did. The bricks were still here. So was I. I wasn't a cold warrior marching into battle. I was a woman remembering herself, piece by piece, as she retraced the corridors of her own history. Outside, the garden hummed with life. The rosemary hedges had grown tall. The sea air slipped through the open arches, carrying the same salt that had stung my eyes the first time I stood on this coast and said, "This will be for her." Only now, I knew it was also for me. The resort bustled with quiet preparations. Staff readied rooms, adjusted linens, arranged vases of fresh orchids in the lobby. I walked among them, unnoticed, content to be a shadow. They thought I was simply the owner doing her morning rounds. They didn't know this was also my pilgrimage, my silent claiming of a life I had nearly given away. By noon, the guests began to arrive. Shiny cars rolled up the drive, doors swung open, laughter spilled into the air. Among them came Vanessa. She stepped out in a white sundress, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, phone already raised for photos. Her friends followed, dragging expensive luggage across the stone path, heels clacking against the floor as though the place belonged to them. Daniel, her husband, tipped a valet like he was scattering crumbs to birds. I watched from the far side of the lobby. She didn't see me. Instead, she turned to her friends and said, "Finally, somewhere decent. Let's hope the staff here actually knows how to treat people." Her words were light, but sharp enough to slice through the air. One of her friends laughed and muttered, "These small-town resorts are lucky we even come. They should be paying us for the publicity." The staff bowed their heads politely, their faces tight with forced smiles. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with sorrow. I had trained those workers to believe in hospitality, to hold their dignity high no matter who stood before them. And now my own daughter reduced them to props in her theater of vanity. As they moved deeper into the lobby, I caught a whisper. One of Vanessa's friends leaned close and said, half joking, "You know, I heard this resort was started by some poor widow years ago. Can you imagine? A woman like that building all this? Obviously, she sold it to a corporation. No way someone like her still owns anything." Laughter followed, careless, cruel in its ignorance. I froze. To them, my life's work was a rumor, a myth, a disposable anecdote. They couldn't imagine that the widow still walked these halls, her name still etched into every contract, her strength still alive in the mortar. The irony was almost unbearable. I turned away, my footsteps steady, carrying me toward the private lounge. Inside, a wide mirror hung on the wall. I stopped and faced it. My reflection was calm, my hair pinned neatly, my blouse buttoned with care. But behind my eyes, fire stirred. Not rage, not vengeance, something deeper, a flame of ownership. I leaned closer, whispering to the woman in the glass, "They think you're gone. They think you've been erased. Let them." My voice did not shake. My lips curved into the faintest smile, one that spoke of storms yet unbroken. The mirror caught the glint in my eyes, steady, burning, patient. And in that stillness I knew the reckoning had already begun. The next day unfolded like a scene rehearsed for years, though none of them knew it. Vanessa arrived in the lobby mid-morning, trailed by her entourage. Her sunglasses dangled from manicured fingers, as if gravity itself bent to her whims. Daniel stood at her side, whispering something that made her laugh, sharp and careless. She strode up to the desk, tapping her nails against the marble as though the sound itself were a demand. "These rooms are unacceptable." she announced. "We specifically asked for Ocean View Suites, top floor. This," she gestured toward the key cards the manager had offered, "is not what we paid for." The manager, a kind man named Harold who had worked with me for years, tried to explain gently. "Mrs. Carter, we've placed you in our premium rooms. The views are still premium." She cut him off. "Do you know who my husband is? Do you know how many followers I have? If you think I'm going to settle for premium, you've lost your mind. I want the penthouse, and I want it now." The staff shifted uncomfortably. Guests turned their heads, curiosity rippling through the room. Harold's hands tightened around the ledger he carried. He bowed slightly, his dignity intact. But I saw the crack forming in his composure. "This is unacceptable service," Vanessa continued, her voice rising. "I'll be leaving a review so devastating that you'll beg me to delete it. You think this little seaside motel can compete in the luxury market? Pathetic." Her friends snickered, adding their own barbs. Daniel crossed his arms, a silent pillar of arrogance. Harold opened his mouth again, but I saw the tremor in his jaw. He didn't deserve this. None of them did. Then the sound of footsteps broke through the noise, firm, deliberate. The security chief, a tall man in a dark suit, approached. His presence silenced the room in an instant. He stopped at the edge of the group, his voice calm, professional, but carrying the weight of command. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "on behalf of the ownership, I must ask you and your party to leave." The words landed like a hammer. Vanessa blinked, laughter frozen on her lips. "Excuse me?" "It is the directive of the owner," he replied. "Your conduct has violated the standards of this establishment. You are no longer welcome to stay." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Her friends exchanged glances. Daniel's face flushed. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "The owner? Who is the owner? Bring them here right now." The security chief's eyes shifted slightly, and then slowly I stepped forward. I didn't need to clear my throat or raise my voice. I didn't need to announce myself. The simple act of moving into the open was enough. The room hushed, as if even the air had paused. My steps echoed softly on the marble. When I reached the desk, Harold lowered his eyes in quiet relief. I placed a hand on the counter, steady, calm. Vanessa's gaze locked on me. Confusion rippled across her face, then disbelief, then something sharper, fear. "Mom?" she whispered. I said nothing. I only inclined my head, the faintest nod. And in that nod, the truth roared louder than any accusation. The walls, the chandeliers, the scent of polished wood and ocean air. Every detail of this place bore my signature. She saw it now. The palace she had flaunted, the jewel she claimed as her playground, was mine. Silence thickened until it was almost unbearable. Guests held their breath, sensing the gravity of the moment. Vanessa's friends looked from me to her, realization dawning with a weight they could not mask. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his authority shriveling in the presence of something he couldn't control. I reached into my bag and withdrew the handkerchief, the same one I had once given her, dismissed as quaint, now carrying the faint stain of blood from the night I signed away my illusions. Without a word, I laid it gently on the counter. The fabric spread out beneath the chandelier's light, the stitched words glowing faintly. For Vanessa. From the hands that never let go. No lecture. No fury. Just this, an emblem of a lifetime sacrifice placed in the open, where everyone could see. The lobby was so quiet I could hear the tide outside pulling against the shore. Vanessa's lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. Her eyes fixed on the cloth, as if it were a mirror showing her everything she had refused to see. I turned slightly, letting the weight of the silence linger. This was the pause, the breath before revelation, the moment where everything she thought she knew unraveled. Vanessa took a step toward me, tears gathering, her voice a broken whisper. "Mom, I raised my hand, not sharply, not in anger. A simple, graceful gesture, my palm lifted in the air. The meaning was clear. Stop. Her words died in her throat. The room held still, the question trembling like glass about to shatter. What would I do next? What would I say? And with that, the air froze on the edge of an answer. Vanessa's lips quivered as she tried to speak, but only fragments came out, jagged and uneven. Mom, I didn't mean... I was just... People expect me to... Her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of her own excuses. She reached for the handkerchief on the counter as if clutching it could rewrite the past. Her friend stood paralyzed, ashamed to look either at her or at me. Daniel shifted his weight from foot to foot, but he said nothing. His silence was the most honest thing about him. I kept my hand raised for another moment before lowering it slowly. My face softened, not out of pity, but out of a quiet resolve. She had already heard everything she needed to hear. I let the silence stretch, its edges sharp enough to cut through all the noise she had built around herself. Finally, I spoke. I spent my life giving to you, I said. My voice was steady, almost tender. Every dollar, every hour, every breath was shaped so you would never know hunger, never know fear. I built this place so you would always have a foundation to stand on. But foundations are not for trampling. Vanessa's eyes brimmed with tears, spilling down her cheeks in uneven streaks. She shook her head, words tumbling over each other. I didn't know. I thought this belonged to someone else. I didn't realize it was you. I gave her the smallest smile, one carved from years of endurance. It doesn't matter what you realized. It matters what I know now. I gave my life to you, Vanessa. Now I give what remains to myself. Her mouth opened again, perhaps to beg, perhaps to promise change. But I had no interest in rehearsed apologies or last-minute vows. The truth was written not in her words, but in decades of dismissals, in the way she had left me behind without hesitation. I turned from her, gently but firmly, and lifted the handkerchief from the counter. Folding it once, I slipped it into my bag. The air in the lobby was heavy, almost sacred. The guests had fallen into reverent silence. Even the employees who had endured her insults now stood taller, their eyes glistening as if they understood they were witnesses to something larger than a family dispute. I walked toward the wide doors that led to the terrace. The click of my heels against the marble filled the room, each step a punctuation mark. When I pushed open the glass doors, a wash of golden light poured in. The sun was setting over the sea, casting long streaks of fire across the waves. The air smelled of salt and promise. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the wind lift strands of my silver hair. For the first time in years, I inhaled deeply. Not as a weary mother or an unseen laborer, but as a woman standing in her own kingdom. My hands rested on the cool stone railing. Below, the tide surged and retreated, eternal and indifferent. I let it remind me that life moves forward, with or without recognition. Behind me, I heard Vanessa sobbing, her pleas muffled by the glass doors. I did not turn. There would be no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace. Love had been given, squandered, and now reshaped. This was not cruelty. This was truth. I lingered there in silence, giving myself and everyone watching a pause to breathe. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted in hues of rose and amber. For the first time, the silence did not feel like emptiness. It felt like victory. Later, in the privacy of my office, I opened the drawer that held the envelope. The documents I had signed weeks earlier lay inside, their black ink sharp and unyielding. The irrevocable trust bore my name, rendering the resort untouchable by anyone else. Vanessa might cry, she might rage, she might beg, but she would never inherit this place. It was mine, in life and in law. That was the final truth, the last protection I owed myself. I placed the envelope back into the drawer, pressing it closed with a calm hand. No one else needed to know. The resort did not require validation any more than I did. Its existence was proof enough. When I returned to the mirror in the lounge later that evening, the woman who stared back at me no longer looked like a shadow. She looked crowned, though no gold touched her head. Her crown was built of scars, of nights without sleep, of sacrifices unseen, a crown no one could strip away. I turned my gaze outward toward an invisible audience beyond the glass. My eyes held steady, the faintest curve of a smile playing at my lips. "If one day," I said softly, "you find yourself denied by the very blood you poured your life into, what will you do? Will you suffer in silence, or will you rise in silence?" The question lingered, unanswered, hanging in the air like the echo of the waves.